Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties. My name is Thomas West, and I have the pleasure of serving as Executive Director of the Peace Studio, the organization bringing you tonight's event in partnership with Now This. Our organization works to advance a message that peace is rooted in individual action and that each of us has a critical role to play in driving a new movement for peace and justice. Our hope is that people everywhere come to see peace as something more than the absence of war or violence, but the presence and participation of all of us in bringing about a more just world. To that end, we work to exemplify what peacebuilding work could look like in practice, to ensure that through a variety of creative expressions, that we all come to understand that there is something we each can be doing to advance peace and justice, particularly in this urgent decade of action around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Last winter, the Peace Studio was thrilled to expand its commitment to this effort through a merger with Images and Voices of Hope, a nonprofit organization that for the past 20 years worked in partnership with journalists, photographers, gamers, and filmmakers to promote and produce storytelling that builds empathy and compassion and connects us across differences. As a united organization, we have spent this past year rallying around extraordinary creative peace builders through our 100 Offerings of Peace campaign, an effort to provide artists, journalists, and media makers of all kinds a chance to consider what peace means to them in the time of COVID-19 and be offered a platform to have their critical messages of hope and unity help us to carry on as exacerbated global challenges threaten to further divide us. Tonight's conversation is the culmination of our 100 Offerings campaign and is part of a larger Peace Studio Summit, a series of 12 virtual events happening today and throughout this week in celebration of the UN International Day of Peace. If you haven't before, I encourage you to go to thepeacestudio.org to check out all the events we have going on throughout the rest of this week, and consider joining us again here on Facebook at 8 p.m. Eastern Time tonight for our 2020 gala featuring His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the actor Ted Danson, Grammy-winning musicians Rhiannon Giddens, Midori Goto, and Joyce DiDonato, the dancer Little Buck, and so much more. Now, before I introduce our moderator for this evening, a quick reminder that at the end of our session today, we may have time for a brief Q&A, so please do feel free to post questions into the Facebook chat should we be able to get to them. In addition, the Peace Studio is excited to announce our partnership today with Social Goods, an online store creating statement-making clothing that helps people feel proud and emboldened to start conversations that matter to them. Our new t-shirt created by Prink Shop includes the text, "Peace requires action." Purchasing the shirt on socialgoods.com or making a small donation on the Peace Studio website are two immediate ways you can help us continue creating programs like this panel today to inspire and encourage peace-building actions. And with that, it's now my honor to introduce our moderator for tonight's event. Kyrie Traber is a nationally awarded playwright, actress, and cultural worker. She is a co-host of the PBS series First Person, the lead community artist in residence with Lincoln Center Education, and co-host of Cheers and Queers with Asake Smith, a podcast in the Gifted Sounds Network. On a personal note, Kirya has played a profound impact in my development as a leader, and I'm proud to call her a friend. Kirya, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. I was not expecting that, and I'm really grateful to be here and a part of this conversation. Without further ado, I'd actually like to introduce our very esteemed panel for this exciting conversation we're going to get into. We have first and foremost Dr. Maya Sotoro, who is, of course, one of the co-founders of the Peace Studio, and in addition to that, a consultant with the Obama Foundation, where she works closely with their international team to develop programming in the Asia-Pacific region and support global girls' well-being through the Girls Opportunity Alliance. Welcome, Maya. And we have Bill T. Jones, artistic director, co-founder, and choreographer of New York Live Arts. He has created more than 140 works for his company. Mr. Jones is the artistic director of the organization that strives to create a robust framework in support of the nation's dance and movement-based artists through new approaches to producing, presenting, and educating. Welcome, Bill T. Jones. And we have Roger Berkowitz, founder and academic director of the Hannah Arendt Center for Politics and Humanities and professor of politics, philosophy, and human rights at Bard College. He's the winner of the 2019 Hannah Arendt Prize for Political Thought given by the Heinrich Boll Foundation in Bremen, Germany. And I should have asked how to pronounce that before we started, but I'm sure he'll correct me later. Thank you. Welcome, Roger. And then we have John Eligo. John is a national correspondent covering race based in Kansas City. His work documents the nuances of America's struggles with race issues, from the protest movement over police violence to the changing face of the nation's cities and suburbs. As a Metro reporter, he broke the story of a bail bond scheme that left poor defendants unable to gain their freedom. Welcome, John.
Good evening.
So we have a panel here that is representing, among many things, academia, human rights organizing, the performing arts, and journalism. And this is a great place to start this conversation that we want to talk about. Hopefully you came here based on the title, which is Peace Building During the Reckoning for Justice, Equality, and Inclusion. Now, if you're watching this, you're probably aware that we are in a moment of reckoning in the United States of America. And I would like us to consider this definition, peace building, that was mentioned a bit in the introduction by Thomas and is otherwise known by the Peace Studio as everything people, communities, and nations can do to ensure and preserve peace. Now, I think that's a really big idea, and peace is a word that we almost take for granted these days. We have often misunderstood notions of the term based on what we've learned in passing about perhaps Gandhi or Dr. King. But I'm curious about what peace building, this verb, might mean in the here and now in 2020. And I'd like to ask Maya, who's done so much work around defining peace and peace building and discussing it. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it means?
Thank you, Kirya. Thanks for the question. Yes, as I see it, peace is often understood as being ideal, ineffectual, an abstraction, a nice concept, but really not particularly pragmatic. And all of us, I believe, at Peace Studio, strive to redefine peace and consider it in terms of positive peace building, which is about the creative process of deepening understanding and commitment to one another, for sure. But it's also about acting to develop educational, economic, political, and social systems that lead to human rights and greater social justice and climate justice. It is a conflict transformation, to use John Paul Lederach's term, which necessarily requires that we address the intricate complexities of our history, that we lean into our discomfort and use conflicts to wrestle with the messy, imperfect, but courageous union and humanity that we have. This also means that we have to invite more faces and voices into the circle, and once connected, consistently work with and on behalf of the most vulnerable in our beloved community. This is, my hope is that this is one opportunity to help each person in our community to understand that they have their own individual point of entry and that there is so much that they can do on behalf of others to build personal, interpersonal, or community peace.
Thank you so much for that very provocative answer. I'm curious for others on the panel, have you come across this peace building as a verb, or what are your reactions to hearing it defined in this moment? Anyone else want to take a stab at that? Roger, do I see you reaching?
I just got to unmute myself. Yeah, sorry. Thanks. It's a fascinating question. I really enjoyed what Maya had to say and found it right. Peace building. I guess I've heard of it somewhere, but in this context, it's somewhat new. I also think of it as in some way about world building. To me, one of the real characteristics of modern society is that it's in crisis, that where, what we call the moment of reckoning is what I've usually call in my work a revolutionary situation coming out of Hannah Arendt. And the old pillars of authority and power have really crumbled. And I think this has been going on for a good 100 years. but accelerates and decelerates at times. And I think we're in certainly an accelerating moment right now. And it's in such a moment when the common world, that those things that hold us together have really crumbled, that you need to build something, peace building, world building, whatever it is. And, you know, what the work that you guys are doing and that I think it needs to be done is, honestly, you need to confront reality. You need to confront the damage, the crumbling of the system, and understand that we are going to talk to people who we really disagree with. I think one of the things we forgot after a number of years, especially after World War II, we forgot how much democracy is about disagreement, fundamental disagreement. And the only way to build new agreement is not through violence. In the end, it's through talking to each other and really talking and listening and disagreeing. And over time, finding those things we can agree with, and those will become the components of a new peace, I hope, or a new world. And this idea that through talking about and thinking together about the world, about justice, peace, and piety, we will make the world more just, peaceful, and pious. And that's the work that I certainly have been trying to do and think we have to be doing today in our world. That's what I would understand peace building to be.
Thank you, Roger. And I think you bring up you bring a specific lens to it using the language of piety, for example. That makes me think a little bit more of some of the traditional definitions of peace that might come with a sort of spiritual alignment. I certainly think there's still room for that to be peace building. And Maya invites us also to consider other actions. I'm wondering, either Bill or John, both of you, have you seen examples of this kind of active peace building in the world of performing arts or journalism that might be something new, something inspiring in a different way?
Well, I guess, Kirya, I guess what I would say is, you know, I've seen peace building, especially in this moment, in a sense of being someone who covers and writes a lot about race and the current climate that we're going through right now, with you know, questions about racial justice and inequality. And it seems like where people are building toward or wanting to build toward this peace, it comes in that most classic of protest chant now, which is no justice, no peace. And I think within that context is where I see efforts to say, hey, if we truly want to be a peaceful society, if we truly want to be a society of peace, then there must be some sort of justice or something that's right across the board for all of us, for everyone. And to me, that's where I think the foundation lays in what I'm really seeing right now in terms of these peace building efforts. So it's a very provocative and interesting question, right? Because as we've seen from this short time talking about it so far, there are many directions to go with peace and what it means. And so I think in various contexts, it takes on different meanings. And that's really kind of what I've seen just on the ground, talking to people and then reporting on these issues.
You bring up no justice, no peace. And when we were actually talking right before we launched this, Bill T. Jones, you said something about peace building sounds like justice to you. Do you have something to build
Actually,
on?
I thank Maya for deepening my understanding of what we're talking about tonight, because quite frankly, I don't think there's anywhere in training a young artist that someone says that an artist is supposed to be peaceful. As a matter of fact, it should be the opposite. And that is the conundrum. Artists are, I was saying to my companion today that in talking about this question, I became an artist to find a voice. And the voice was not to say, why can't we all get along? But the voice is to say something about what is not happening, and to try to find a way that is imbued with beauty. And beauty is a controversial word in the art world now. So does beauty make the human psyche more beautiful, more calm? Not necessarily. Beauty strives for the sublime, and as I understand the sublime, it is terror, awe verging on terror. So artists are not necessarily peacemakers. They would like to say to a world, it is okay to be who you are and to speak your truth. And what's more, we would love it. We need for you to show us another reality. So I'm not quite sure if you want artists on the forefront of peace building, unless you want artists as entertainers. And entertainers, that's what they do. The entertainers are supposed to make us feel sensual, relaxed, fulfill our fantasies, sexualize us. So artists are a troubling lot, but I wouldn't want to be a part of any society or movement that did not have room for them.
Maya, I saw you shake your head. Please go ahead.
Yes, yes, but you see, your definitions of peace are very much aligned with mine. I do not think of peace simply as peace of mind. I think of peace as full inclusion, sustained dialogue. I think that pain is a perfect starting point for peace building, because we really need, for instance, to feel empathy, to feel sorrow, to be taken apart in order to build organization, to start a movement. We need to, on any given day, to receive fuller versions of the truth, which artists can give to us. We need to stop ourselves from dehumanizing, which in extreme forms leads to apartheid, police brutality, and genocide. But it's also something that good people often unconsciously do so that they don't get overwhelmed. That's happening over there. That genocide is there. That suffering is there in media, and the arts make us feel things up close, which make us determined, which help us to see solutions, which help us to regain hope in the presence of one another. So the work that you do is peace building to me. It's not simply about feeling no discomfort. In fact, it must begin from a place of deep discomfort, and we have to then lean into that discomfort in order to unravel our own complicity, our own unawareness, for instance. This is such vital importance because this work arouses our courage to act. And then every effort that emerges from that discombobulating new understanding can build a better and more beloved community, in my view.
You know, you speak about this discomfort and this turning up within oneself. It makes me think, you know, John, you've already evoked the protests that have been happening this summer, and even now there might be a protest right now. I'm in New York City. We were just declared an anarchist state, apparently this morning, I learned. Because we are in a moment in which civil disobedience is on the rise again, and organizing in this way that we've all seen throughout our lives in different ways. There's a massive movement, and that movement in many ways has been led by public discourse, led by social media. We talk about the murder of George Floyd was spread by a video taken on a cell phone that was spread across the globe through social media platforms and caused quite a bit of unrest within ourselves, quite a bit of discomfort, disgust, etc. Similarly, the Me Too movement, which, you know, was our season last year and the year before, was people coming forward with acts of violence that they had enacted on them. People, survivors, no longer wanting to be silent. Again, not at all being quiet and just leading with forgiveness, but instead leading with a call to action. I'm curious, each of you in your own way are in the public conversation. You know, Bill, you evoked the provocative artist. So we're in the conversation, we're in the public discourse. Where is this line between a peace building that Maya's inviting us into that is messy, that even, you know, Roger said is not agreeing, is disagreement, and where might it cross the line, or does it? You know, how do we regulate this space?
May I just offer that I wonder if the word peace is a bit like the word love or hope. They're important concepts, but they're a bit, I believe they're a bit bankrupt. And therefore we need another language, which is what artists are supposed to do. So who argues with the fact that we all want to live in peace? But I don't think we understand the complexity of human nature. I challenge anyone to say that humans are by nature peaceful. Therefore, we are talking, Roger, about a new world. But I just, not just to be provocative, but I really do wonder if the word is like that poster of Mr. Obama, hope, right? Felt good going down, didn't it? But now it doesn't have a very good shelf life. So, but please, whatever it takes to bring fair-minded people together with energy to achieve what Maya's trying to say. But I think the word is threadbare.
Well,
I think it needs reinvention. Peace building is at the service of a word or a concept that needs re-examination. And everything I hear Maya saying sounds to me like justice. It sounds like justice. So, and that's in the air. No peace, no justice, no peace. And let's talk one more thing about that statement, John. You know, as an artist, I can say it. Everybody, look, we can't have justice unless we have peace. Or we can say, if you don't give me justice, we ain't got no peace. Same statement, but it's something about the emphasis. Now, I'm a performer and an artist, but that is what I believe context and language is really at the crux of what we're talking about. And I do think the language is tired.
So, as a playwright, I truly am a word nerd, and I could get lost in a conversation about the best terms. But so that we don't get stuck in a semantic place, what is it that we're envisioning? And maybe it isn't for each of us on this panel to sort of determine the world beyond our life, but let's do that exercise for a moment. What are examples of peace building with a goal that you've seen or something that you think we're moving towards? What might peace, if it's not called peace, maybe it's called something else, but that thing that we're struggling for, what is that and how is that being sought? Maya, did you have a response? Oh, I think you're muted again.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate all of this important dialogue. I think that I don't disagree with anything that Bill said. I think that we do need to examine our language, re-examine. And if we don't have another word, which, you know, for me, peace building is what it comes closest to kind of being a word that can encompass the personal peace, interpersonal, and communal peace that I work towards as an educator, then I would love to at least revitalize or wash our eyes to see those words in new ways. For me as an educator, a lot of the active peace building that I see comes in the form of service learning, to be sure, people finding purpose. It's about place-based, culturally responsive learning. It is about thoughtful forms of educational exchange that come through difficult conversations. Things like oral history, biography, and the arts, again, awaken learning communities with a poignant set of images and stories that can enliven compassion and put us in touch with the human predicament in ways that I think are really powerful and that lead to sustained dialogue. We use something called the structured academic controversy, where we, you know, take voices that are shared through letter, through journal or pulpit speech or poetry, and we take these controversial topics on from one perspective, and then in the next breath we switch and share the other perspective, and then we braid those perspectives and thereby learn from multiple perspectives and challenge ourselves to grow also from a place of vulnerability and often sorrow. There are so many resources, from Teaching Tolerance, the Equal Justice Initiative, Facing History in Ourselves, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and many more. There is curriculum that requires that we be uncomfortable and that can offer a sustained debate in educational spaces that allow for the development of a powerful leadership, and that is necessary and pragmatic today.
So Maya, are you saying in a way, are you saying that it's once again, whenever you speak, it sounds like you're talking about justice to me, Because every one of those examples, I'm wondering how we get from debate to this world where we don't have conflict. I don't think a debate is one step moving there. It's not, because we are talking, because we are expressing, doesn't mean that we all will agree. And I think that is in the nature of human beings, we do not agree. And there's something else that we've got to get at. And I can only think about this idea of changing the world inside. So I know it sounds like semantics, but this is very important somehow, that we understand that it's not, we're confusing, I think, the striving for justice with this thing called peace. Peace be with you, my brother. What is that? And how does justice what does justice have to do with that?
The reason I personally don't use just justice is because sometimes there are other things that come in to the umbrella of peace. For instance, mental health, stewardship of community environment and culture, and healing from trauma. And sometimes peace building might be more than what I consider to be justice, but I consider justice and peace inextricably linked. I don't often do debates with my students. Debates are simply differences of opinion, but as I mentioned, we do something like the doubting game, the believing game, and the sharing game, where we challenge a particular position, we deconstruct it, we push against it, we argue, we offer evidence, we offer feeling and emotion, and then we believe it. We try to take that same set of ideas and we absorb it, and we uphold it, and we defend it. Now, again, people
and that makes us more peaceful, and that makes them more peaceful.
Let her finish. I'd love to hear the end of this game. Go on, Maya.
It's not so that people learn to empathize with their oppressor, and it's not to suggest that there is no right and wrong, but it's a process that enables us to sometimes understand the brokenness of others or ourselves. It's about fearing less, and it's about making sure that we have the capacity to move forward in action with a fuller version of the truth at hand. So it's not just about me arguing against you, it's about me beginning to absorb your reality, to accept that there is a danger in having a single story, and to begin to layer a wide series of stories into my own life, and to become part of my human library. And there are lots of I think examples of ways that we can source solutions from the community and learn from one another that do in fact bring personal peace, in addition to being part of our necessary fight for justice.
John, I'd actually love to get your perspective on this, because some of what Maya was just referring to reminds me a lot of the work of a journalist. And, you're someone who is right on the cutting edge of the conversation that we're having right now, the demands for justice, particularly racial justice and injustice in the United States. And you're coming at it from journalism, which has at least a reputation of needing to be unbiased. How do you see yourself fitting into this conversation about peace, justice, peace building?
No, I'm glad you bring that up, because that's exactly where my mind was going with this. As I heard Maya and Bill talking, was there's recently been a lot of conversations, especially among young Black journalists, young journalists of color, over the past several years, as we've seen these issues of racial justice come to the forefront in the political and in the social discourse. And there's the question of are the old kind of like truisms of journalism, tell both sides, tell it down the middle, are those real? Like, is that really what it should be? And I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing a distinction between just being this impartial, tell both sides, and being fair, right? So this is where I think peace building comes into this. So and again, I say this comes from the perspective, there are many definitions in my mind of peace and what that can be. But I think at its essence, I think we all want some sort of state of being. Maybe peace isn't a word, and more so maybe it's a state of being, but we all want the state of being where we feel that we are able to be who we are, to be comfortable with who we are, to be able to live and live as we are, right? And so where I see this issue of fairness coming in, I may write an article, for instance, in which that might be pretty critical of a public official, for instance, or it might be very critical of someone because they are, for whatever reason, under a lot of scrutiny and under a lot of pressure. Now, there are times they may not want that story necessarily there. They may not necessarily like that to be the narrative being told about them. But did I go to them? Did I give them a fair hearing in my story? Did I lay out the facts and also give them a fair chance to weigh in on the facts? So yeah, there might still be tension there. There isn't, oh, they necessarily agree with everything that's in the story, or the people who were spoken to, or that might not be how they would have done it. But have I given them a fair hearing? And to me, that can bring some level of peace, if we want to call it, to a person. So I think there's this question of what peace really does. And I think even in tension, you can still have peace. And I do think, Bill is completely correct that like we are generally not peaceful beings. I mean, there isn't just like, peace is not the default, but I think inherently we all want some form of peace, I think.
Yeah, Roger, do you have a thought about this? What are we headed towards as humans? Maybe we don't want to be peaceful, but is there a state of being that we are striving towards?
Well, I think humans are not peaceful beings by nature, and yet civilization is some way to put kind of limits on our instincts, whether you're whether you're id or whatever it is that you want, in order to provide some stability. I think that a common world is both a world that is going to have certain foundations that we share, and yet it's going to change. The world, humans change. We're not stable, peaceful. I mean, if peace meant stasis, we are not stasis-like creatures in the least. And so, but I think, there's another word that really hasn't come up today, although Bill has sort of, I think, at least alluded to it, which is freedom. Freedom is often not a very peaceful concept. Freedom demands a lot of people. It demands people being individuals, unique, often grating against the system, civil disobedience. It demands change, and freedom. To build freedom as a common political project, to build a world that we share, a kind of civilization, is very difficult. And there are, and honestly, in history, there are, probably you can count on one hand the periods that were really stable periods of freedom, where people succeeded in building together a civilization, a culture that, and they don't last very long. And we're clearly in one right now that has fallen apart. I think to build one that would last again in freedom is going to be an enormous challenge, and it's not going to happen in a decade, and not in my lifetime. But I think what we can do is stand up there and articulate, as John did, what are the journalistic standards, as Bill did, what are the artistic standards? What are the ways that we people who have integrity and decency and care about justice, but also care about freedom, care about treating people, how do we act, and how do we talk to each other, and how do we begin the conversation that will, over time, maybe for my grandkids, develop some sort of a system that they'll be proud of that will last a couple of years. That's the flow of life. And the idea that we're going to create some just system now, I think is actually counterproductive.
Interesting. Well, I'm particularly interested. You brought up this concept of freedom, and thank you for the historic context and vantage point. But I think one thing that is another $5 word we might throw into this conversation is power. And I'm curious about how this issue of peace or not, justice or not, aggression or not, disagreement or agreement, how does power play into that? And particularly, I mean, I think we might argue that all of us on this panel have a certain amount of power because here we are having this conversation. Many of us have letters behind our name, et cetera. So, you know, we're speaking ourselves from a position of power. What are the responsibilities that we might have in this conversation around peace building? And that might be different from those with less power or those with more power. Bill, I saw
I
you.
would think, I'm very curious to see how peace building is going to work in the next 4 years that we're going into. I'm very interested how peace building will work if the forces of conservatism that I, quite frankly, often disagree with, if they are able to solidify the power in the way that Charles Blow talked about today in his piece. How does peace building happen in a climate that is hell-bent on taking away freedom from people? So peace building means hold your peace, know who your friends are, pull into your communities, resist picking up a gun. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know what, yeah, I'd like people to talk, let's come into the real world I know we're all in the real world. Let's come into a world that we're about to go into, which could be a nightmare. Now let's try out our idea of peace building there.
Well, and go ahead, Maya.
Oh, I was going to say, you know, I, like other people, am deeply concerned about the world. I guess I wanted to try to respond to Bill by perhaps thinking about the fact that, you know, now people do have the power that you spoke of to, you know, to self-publish, to blog, to vlog, you know, to use social media, which can also be used to divide and dichotomize. I just watched that Social Dilemma on Netflix, where, you know, Facebook, Google, and others build personal algorithms based on our choices, and then, you know, feed us content that bifurcates, so that we feel aversion to others and confusion. How could they possibly think the way they do? And so fear and anger and worry and insecurity can blossom. But I do think that as we look at the next few years, I do think that on any given day we can read the news from multiple sources, hopefully to receive a fuller version of the truth. I think we can find community source solutions. We can, of course, and should keep protesting and signing petitions. We can also join you know, efforts and conferences on civil and human rights to engage leadership. We can think about how to lean and impact policy, find data and resource informed ideas and information to push for things we care about and build accountability in our own organizations. I think we should all raise our voices and lend it to encourage societal reform, and all of those things can, I believe, help. But we do have to think about courage, I think, if we're going to rename or wrestle with our words in new ways. I think we have to not simply throw ourselves into the mix, but also keep at it and define courage as walking down that long road where sometimes you don't see progress fast enough, where you don't know where you're going to get your next sustenance, and sometimes it's hard to trust in the destination. And I think that we do have to take courage, and I would love to hear how all of you think you might find courage to take on the multifaceted problems that we face as a country and as a world.
Does anyone want to respond to that directly? Where do you take courage?
Well, I'm encouraged by what we are doing right now. I think that I have to remind myself daily that peace is a privilege, not a right. And I believe courage is what you pay for this privilege. So that would be one thing. And I am I'm a fighter, and I'm oftentimes in somebody's face, at once seducing, but at the same time trying to help take things down, take things apart. We have on the front of our theater in New York, we have a slogan now, question everything. And we are still in a situation where we can do that without being hauled off to jail for the time being. And until that changes, and I'm sure, Maya, you know very well what I'm talking about, everybody in this call knows what I'm talking about, that is a privilege that less and less people around the world are able to do. So I'm going to try to make beauty. I'm going to try to pull my young dancers together and teach them how to be fierce, listen to them, and have faith. Faith in the future. Have faith is something, and faith is not guaranteed, you know. So courage and faith to me go hand in hand, and you've got to be willing to go to jail. You've got to be willing to lose people you love and not to lose even lose your own life. That's what I've learned.
And you got to be willing to risk your job or your livelihood. I mean, this is what to be, if you are going to be a thinker or an actor or an artist or an activist, you have to be able to do. You know, Hannah Arendt, who I work on, says there are no dangerous thoughts. Thinking itself is dangerous. Part of what we do in the academic world, when we do it well, is teach people to be fearless in challenging their own presumptions, their assumptions, their backgrounds, where they come from. I always start every class saying, if I do my job, you will come into this class less happy than when you came. You will come out of it less happy than when you came into it. Because what I'm trying to do is tear you apart. I'm trying to tear down everything you believe in. And if I succeed, you should go through the existential crisis that many of my students go through. That's part of becoming an adult. I don't think there's any way to be an adult without having an existential crisis. And so we have to have the courage to do that. The problem right now, you know, so much of academy is everyone doesn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And you can't create existential crises in students if you don't hurt their feelings. This is a problem that we are all confronting, and, you know, not very well, I should say, in the academy. And one of the reasons we're losing a lot of support around the country is that there's a sense that we're not doing it well on all sides, I should say. But this is what I think we have to commit ourselves to. And it's what does not happen enough. I mean, I was really taken with what Maya said earlier, and I don't know enough I can only ask, I can't, because I don't know what she does, but she says that they have these events where people take on other viewpoints, right? And I guess my question is, do you actually bring in the people with the other viewpoints in equal numbers on a level of equality to do that? Or is it more we bring in one or two people, or we read them, or whatever? Because what I have found in the academy is an unwillingness to actually, we tolerate opposing viewpoints. We don't respect them. We don't say that they're as legitimate as mine. We just disagree. And that's, to me, what's really missing in the academic world right now, is meeting with people we disagree with on an equal playing field, not on a field where we tolerate them. One of the things you'd asked us to think about is where there's examples of peace building in our world. And, you know, I had a hard time thinking about that in the academic world. I don't think much of it right now. But one person came to mind who I think has been more than anyone else out there doing this work in the academic world, and that is Cornel West. He has, with two different people, sought out conversations with people he disagrees with. On the one hand, with Robert George at Princeton, who's a conservative religious scholar, And on the other hand, with John McWhorter, who's an African-American scholar who disagrees with Cornel West on many issues. And they have had a number of public conversations where they respect each other, they laugh, they talk, and they disagree, and they build bridges. That is so rare in my world of the academy right now that I don't know of any other examples of it. And that's the kind of courage we need if we're going to make any progress.
I'd like to jump in for a moment. Thank you for that very specific example. And perhaps that's something that folks can look up if they're curious about those talks. What I'd like to name, though, is understandably, as it is your field, you're speaking a lot about the academy. And on the one hand, while you speak about these two distinguished scholars being able to meet on an equal playing field, disagree, and also be cordial with one another, you also talked about tearing down your students. And I know you mean that euphemistically, but it does bring to mind that we're already talking about in the academy a certain amount of power, a certain amount of access. Even those who make it to the hallowed halls have a certain amount of power, right? So perhaps there is quite necessarily an argument that something does need to be torn down. I'm curious about those who aren't yet there. What are the ways in which, what about those that have not yet been built up? And what are the ways in which peace building might support that, and not in the lay down and take it sort of way, as Bill would never want us to do, but in another way. And I don't know if John, you have something to speak to this, because you've been on the ground interviewing some of the most economically disadvantaged in some of the communities you've been in, or Maya, in your humanitarian work. There it's not quite about we need to get people to come to the table to have a nice conversation and take on each other's beliefs, but there's a real lack of access and power. How does peace building impact that?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to just a couple of weeks ago when I was in Kenosha following the shooting of Jacob Blake, the young African-American man who was shot in the back by the police. I was doing an article about voting and kind of looking at how might this incident really rally specifically Black people in Wisconsin to the polls, because there we saw a big drop off in voting numbers in the 2016 election. I was, on the one hand, as much as I knew how disempowered people felt, that people from marginalized communities, how they could feel, as much as I knew that academically and in reality, I was still pretty stunned by the level of cynicism that I encountered. I mean, I was at this, there was one guy from the Urban League organization. He was trying to register voters, and he saw a young Black woman and a young Black man standing there. And he went up, he goes, "Are you registered to vote?" And then the young woman was like, I know my vote doesn't count. And so there's already this sense of like, it just makes you cringe in a way, right? Because, we know that, yes, the system is stacked. The system is clearly, not everyone comes out of the womb on the level playing field, right? The system is built and designed to benefit some people over others, right? To benefit groups of people over others. But there's always this, maybe in part of me, is just me individually, there's always this kind of like a little bit of a hope of optimism in myself that anger, that a lot of anger that we see fueled by these injustices, by this lack of peace that we see, that will rally people to a way. But it feels like if people are not there yet in some ways, right? So I think in some ways we're asking people to imagine a world, to close your eyes and imagine this sense of peace, this sense of justice, as Bill has been talking about a lot. Like, imagine this thing that just is not there and has never been there, that they've never seen. So how do you make that come to fruition? And just the last thing I'll say, the one thing that did strike me about where I do see a window for optimism and hope on this is that one young man I was talking to a bunch of guys just sitting on a stoop, and a lot of them were like, "Oh man, voting, we're not doing that. It doesn't matter. It's rigged. It's, what." There was one guy who was like, "You know what? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it does not matter, like, if we go out and vote, but we need to keep doing it until it matters." He was the one who was delivering that message to his friends. And maybe there's something, and it's easy for us sitting in this position of privilege and power to say, "Hey, just keep doing this until it matters," to someone who doesn't have the access and the privilege that I have. But maybe that's, I don't know, maybe it's asking people to take that leap of faith that someday, they will see those true changes bear out.
So, John, I wonder, and Kyrie, how did Dr. King do it with people who had grown up with lynchings and police? And how did he get the people to hold on, y'all? We're going to walk slowly, and we're not going to be violent. Is that do we still have that capacity? I mean, I want to know what he was. He was a Christian. He was a deeply religious man. He had a lot of belief, and I guess many of those people. Can we get there? Because, we want them to keep doing it, but we also want them to believe that they can do it and not be violent, not be, angry or violent. What do you think? What was the secret sauce for Dr. King and John Lewis?
I definitely want to throw this question to Maya, who I think has done some scholarship on peace movements generally. Do you have any thoughts about a historical lens to serve us today?
Well, I think we all have the information that I have. I mean, it was through consistent and deep conversation. It was through practice. It was through preparation. It was through careful organization. It was through demonstration of character. It was through, I think, the work of, in his words, building a vision of beloved community and then backwards mapping in an organized way. How do we get there? How do we lose our souls in the process, and making sure that we can, at the end of our road, wherever that leads, however long we live, we can be proud of what we have done and how we have done it. And I think it was through a demonstration of great strength that we saw that something seemingly soft like nonviolence, social change, which is not passive, but deeply active and deeply courageous, could round the edges of a sword and make genuine change. I mean, I think that is the kind of courage for justice that everyone here is working for and towards, and it's what we do have to have, what Bill's mentioned, faith in, our capacity as human beings. I don't think we're necessarily built for peace insofar as I think conflict is inevitable again, but we can transform those conflicts. We can think about how we learn from those conflicts. We can make sure that we demand better for our own and others with those conflicts and through those conflicts. I think that we are genetically, though, predisposed to collaborate, which is different from, I think that we understand that that there is vitality in connection, and that when we source ideas from many places, that we are stronger than when we are standing alone. And I think that that's certainly one way that Dr. King did it, was that, that profound respect for others, and the deep conviction and the power of collaborative solutions.
Yes, I think your mentioning of the beloved community is an studied, under discussed approach to Dr. King's work. And when I think about beloved community, I think so much about the work of community, right? We all have families, right? Of one chosen or blood, and there's a lot of work there. And I think in some ways you all have already spoken to the way in which that work shows up through discourse, and then a little bit through perhaps voter organizing. Are there other kinds of organizing or community building that you've witnessed? Perhaps, I know the field of performing arts is having quite a stir up as well right now. Is there anything that's particularly stimulating you, Bill, or that you're thinking about as a good example?
Well, what I think is really interesting is how people in my field are, this word is overused, pivoting. And now that real time and space has been taken away from us, people are finding a way to work in this medium that we're communicating here now. And there's great investment. And like, for instance, the Guggenheim Works in Progress is putting lots and lots of money into encouraging performers, artists to make work for digital. It hurts a lot of us who came to the performing arts because we wanted real sweat, real time, real gravity. But now I think there'll be a generation of people who know how to do that. And you know, just quickly, Maya, do we need our martyrs as well? Do we need our sacrificial persons to raise the stakes in such a way? I mean, beloved community, I think I understand what you mean, but we also came equipped with some real saints, if you will, who literally lay down their lives. Is that what we need, John, to get those kids to understand that this is worth doing, and it's worth doing it in an orderly and nonviolent way? Do we need martyrs? Because it's coming. There are beasts out there. There are beasts in power, and they have guns. They have more guns than we do. And no, Roger, I don't think it's equal on both sides. I know I might sound sometimes rabidly left-wing, but no, I don't think both sides are as oppressive. Now, you know it from academia. So, in other words, do we need martyrs? And what does it take to get people to say, once again, we shall overcome without cynicism?
And I'll just say, this is a great question, Bill, and it might be our last. So does anybody want to take that on? Maybe we can squeeze in an answer or two.
I'd love to hear from John.
And in some ways, I will add, I think in some ways we do have the martyrs that are these folks caught on, where police are caught on video, enacting violence on citizens, on black lives being taken for no reason at all. That's a kind of martyrdom, but I think you're also talking about an intentional martyrdom as well.
Yes, big difference, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Big difference.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Bill, that's a hard question, right? Because I think it gets back in some ways to what I was saying earlier. Like, I feel like someone like myself or like any of us here coming from some sort of position of privilege that we've, either born into or obtained somehow, it's easy for us to say, like, hey, go out there, like, be that martyr, like, be that one, or but like, I may not. It might be easy for me to say that, right? But like, to actually get one to do that, given how their life is lived, how one's life might be lived. If you're living on the margins, your life is lived, from second to second, from paycheck to paycheck, from whatever, from police encounter to police encounter, right? Your life is such on the margins. It's just hard to envision like what gets you there, and that's why I was curious about like, this martyrdom that we're seeing, so-called martyrdom, like Kirya mentioned, about with people who've died at the hands of police and things like that. Was that going to be enough to get people there? It feels like it's not, but I guess one thing I will say though, when it comes to the issue of getting people there in a nonviolent way, I think part of the challenge, and this is where I fault us as the media too. I think it's part of the media, it's society, it's lots of people in general, is that we don't necessarily respond to nonviolence, I don't think. So, for instance, Colin Kaepernick takes a knee. Like, there wasn't this was a great nonviolent way, like that certainly wasn't the response, right? Or even, when Ferguson, when Michael Brown was killed in 2016, was there any who really started paying attention there until that Quick Trip gas station burned like the night after he was killed? And that's when we pay attention. We see right now in Louisville, with the potential decision on the Breonna Taylor case coming this week, the city is already shutting down, like they're closing courthouses. The city's shutting down, preparing and bracing for the reaction to whatever that decision might be, which we could possibly hear this week. So we don't respond as a society necessarily to nonviolence. So that's why it's hard for me, maybe it's good as journalists. We don't always have to come up with the solutions, right? We just kind of have to see what we see. And I don't know how we move beyond that, right? I don't know how we get people to pay attention when there's not this certain unease and unrest there.
Right.
And Kirya, just indulge me just for a moment. Right now, as I'm sitting here, there's heat growing in my chest. It is heat that is at once outrage and anger. And it is my mother shouting, "You're going to have to kill me." That is the engine that has carried us before. Somebody has got to come up there and say, you're going to have to kill me. And they are going to go into the fire. I mean, this is dramatic language. Excuse me, I'm a performer, but that is what has led before. That is what has led before. Who was willing to walk right into the bayonets? Who was it? And we need the strategists too. We need the Roger Berkowitz, we need the John, and we certainly need Miss Maya. But there's got to be something that's got to take fire. And wouldn't it be great if it was a controlled burn? Wouldn't it be great? But unfortunately, it's never controlled. I'd be very curious to see what this conversation is like in a year or 2 years. What peace building conversation is like in a year, 2 years, 3 years.
Well, I think Bill Jones just committed himself to returning in years and having this conversation again with us.
You invite me, I'm glad to come. Yeah.
I think so too, and we'll have to have a part 2 because we are unfortunately at time. But I thank you all so much for this, as you said, warming conversation. I want to say that we talked about things such as courage, debate, discourse, justice, accountability, and of course, peace. And I think that there's something I want to leave us with in what John was saying, that peace might not come just in our actions, but in the way we tell the stories about our actions. And that, I think, links us all together in our various fields. So I encourage the listening audience to follow everyone here. The work that they're doing is ongoing. These conversations don't stop right here. And if you're interested in more of the Peace Studio, please join at 8 p.m. on Facebook for the 2020 Gala featuring His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the actor Ted Danson, Grammy-winning musicians Rhiannon Giddens, Midori Gatto, Joyce DiDonato, dancer Lil Buck, and so much more. So there's more from the Peace Studio. There's more from all of us. And we thank you so much for being with us. Thanks, everyone.
Peace.
Thank you, John.
Peace. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, John.
We
Thanks,
go
Kirya.
forward.
Thanks,
We
Maya.
go forward.
Yep.
Aloha.
Take care.